New York City is taking steps to reform policing in the months following the death of George Floyd. The city's mayor, Bill de Blasio, signed legislation to overhaul how the NYPD operates. The reforms include a ban on chokeholds and a cut to the city's police budget. It also requires to make disciplinary complaints against officers public. The moves have drawn the ire of the city's police commissioner, Dermot Shea. He has called de Blasio's reforms insane and a bow to mob rule. However, we are beginning to get a look at some of these newly unveiled disciplinary complaints. Journalists at the city obtained hundreds of reports to New York's Civilian Complaint Review Board alleging police abuses. Several law enforcement groups are fighting in court to keep any more of these records from being unveiled. Greg B. Smith helped report this story. He's an investigative reporter for the city and joins us now from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Greg. Great to have you with us. So did these records reveal any patterns in the allegations filed against NYPD officers? And were there instances of clear repeat offenders?
Yeah, I mean, this data is basically complaints that are filed with what's called the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And there are enormous patterns. So what we found when we were looking at this was you'll see that there'll be dozens of civilian complaints where with very specific cops. So, and it's not every cop. Let's make that very clear. But there are a certain number of cops who have repeat complaints, and they, a couple of them have like 80 complaints over the course of their career. Most cops, by the way, do not have those kind of numbers. It's much more. Once in a while they might run into some issue, but these cops that we were looking at had pretty dramatic track records of civilian complaints. And also, in the corroborative aspect of this was that in some of these cases, not all, they also were being sued. There were lawsuits. They would get sued by some of these people, and then at times the city would have to pay out big bucks to settle these lawsuits.
And so what is the process then by which these claims are investigated? And at which point, do investigators look at someone, like you said, that might have 80 complaints against them and say, look, where there's this much smoke, there's got to be some fire?
Right. That actually is what we're working on here at the news website, The City. We're trying to understand what exactly NYPD does about tracking the complaint histories and the lawsuit histories. They do that, but it's not clear what they factor in. So when you're a patrol officer, you get X number of complaints. They definitely have. They know this. There's a data set that that the New York City Police Department keeps of these complaints, and then you take a test. You want to become a sergeant. The number of complaints goes with you to the sergeant level, then to the lieutenant, and then to captain, and then you're out of the civil service system, and then you become a purely discretionary appointment, which is deputy inspector, assistant chiefs, and all of the multiple star chiefs, all the way up to the police commissioner. And so there is a track record that the New York City Police Department supposedly keeps an eye on. What we're not clear on is how they factor it in. And we've had different versions of this. We've talked to certain cops who have said to us that nobody really pays attention to unsubstantiated CCRB complaints, that it doesn't matter. And even substantiated ones will not stop you from rising to the top levels of the department. So the process is very opaque. It's hard to see what's going on behind the scenes.
Right, and yet despite your reporting that shows many officers are exonerated after any sort of investigation, or the complaints are deemed, as you said, unsubstantiated or unfounded, still the police unions are working hard to keep them from the public. Why do they want to keep them a secret, especially since it looks like nothing really happens as a result of them anyway?
That's a very good question. One of the answers to that might just be that they're used to it, because the law that was called 50A that was repealed that had for years prohibited the release of any disciplinary records for first responders, not just police, also fire department and corrections officers. It's been on the books forever. It went on the books in the 70s. And so these kind of records have been essentially hidden from the public for years and years and years. And only occasionally some of this stuff would come out because there would be a particularly egregious situation. Fairly recently, the New York City Police Department would release some information about some of these cases, but it was not done in a systemic way. And so the vast majority of these records were kept from the public. And so why are the unions going into court, which they are? They're currently in federal court trying to prevent the release of pretty much most of these records because they're claiming that somehow that by releasing a cop's history of civilian misconduct, police misconduct involving stop and frisks, excessive use of force, these kind of things, somehow the release of that information will endanger the cop. This has been their argument from the start, and they also are claiming that there are privacy concerns. And so they're in the federal court, and we don't know what's going to happen with that. That's going to be up to a judge.
Right. The other side of that is that sunlight can be a great antiseptic. All right. Well, Greg B. Smith, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Happy to help out.